how can I shift to be a challenge-oriented leader who instead sits in the tension and knows how to tolerate that rather than relieving it right away, or invites growth and struggle from others and actually celebrates it as a sign of maturity? You're heading in the right direction because you're sitting in the tension. I'm Mac McCarthy, and this is the Leader's Journey podcast. We're in a series where we're exploring what it means for leaders to develop a stronger emotional immune system. Just as the body's immune system protects it from harmful threats, every church and every organization has an emotional immune system that must learn how to respond to anxiety, to pressure and disruption in healthy ways. And the thing is, leaders play a really significant role in shaping the health of that system, not simply through strategy or skill, but how they respond when anxiety enters the room. So to help us explore this, we've been interacting with Peter Steinke's excellent book. It's a classic called How Your Church Family Works. And near the end of this book, Steinke outlines 7 health-influencing responses. These are practical ways leaders can strengthen both themselves and the systems they lead. In our last episode, we focused primarily on leading ourselves, staying grounded, self-differentiated, and less reactive in anxious systems. In today's episode, Trisha and I shift towards how healthy leaders relate to and form other people. Specifically, we explore why healthy leaders focus on strengths rather than weaknesses and challenge rather than comfort. Anxious leaders often overfocus on problems, weaknesses, and trying to get immediate relief, while healthy leaders help people grow, build resilience, and develop capacity over time. And so as you listen to today's episode, I want to encourage you to reflect on your own leadership defaults. Where does your energy naturally go? Does it naturally go towards strengths or towards weaknesses, towards rescuing and maybe providing comfort, or towards creating challenge and developing people? So maybe create some space by hitting pause or even after the episode's over, just to reflect on your own leadership a little bit. Thanks so much for listening. Let's jump up. Thanks so much for listening. Let's jump into episode 2.
I'm really glad we're back here for another part of this conversation, because since we talked last, I have been so stuck on focus on yourself, right? Not on everybody else. And it's one of those things that now that I see it, I can't not see it. And Kathleen Smith also did an amazing treatment of that on her Substack this week, which we'll link to in the show notes. And it's life-changing. So I'm so glad that we focused on that and we talked about it, and now I can't get away from it.
I know, and talking about it has a way of bringing it front and center and then reminding us to act on what we already know. And I had a similar situation this week. Our staff, we have a pretty flexible work environment, and that comes with some challenges of trust, like who's doing what at what time. And we had, as an executive team, myself and 2 others, just noticed some tensions around maybe some lack of accountability and how that might be impacting our team. And about halfway through the week, I realized I haven't been clear about what I need to make sure that there's systems of trust in place. And the moment I named, here's what I need to feel good about our calibration of flexibility and accountability, the 2 other team members thanked me. There's like that. They were like, that's all that I need. And so I had been so consumed with like how other people are functioning, and all I needed to do was name what I want and need. And
which they say is the essence of leadership, right? But it's so hard to do.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope everybody who listened maybe is noticing other ways that they've gotten fixated on others and then are going, oh, if I just focus on defining myself in relationship to others, things can often go much better. So the first podcast was obviously on focusing on self rather than others. The second theme of health influencing responses that Steinke elevates or brings to the surface for us has to do with how we relate to other people. And there were sort of 2 that you and I isolated that get at this that we want to focus on today in this episode. And the first one is to focus on strengths rather than weaknesses. And then the second was to normalize challenge rather than comfort. So I think it'd be fun to unpack both of those. And I do sense that they overlap a little bit. They complement one another. But let's start with, what does it mean to focus on strengths rather than weaknesses?
I just think when anxiety is high, it is so tempting to go look for problems so that we can fix them, right? Which is why we don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, I'm going to focus on all the weaknesses and none of the strengths. But when anxiety's high, first of all, I think our brains filter out strengths because our brains want us to focus on weaknesses because that's where we perceive the threats might be. And so we're fighting our brains if we're not focusing on weaknesses. But also, it's just so tempting to want to go out and look for, it's the old story about I brought home a report card and I had 4 A's and a B, and all my dad could focus on was a B. That old story that everybody has some version of, well, that's what we do when anxiety is high. And to be reminded to pull our attention back to the strengths in the system is challenging.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, you're just normalizing. That's part of how we're wired. We're wired to perceive threats and to focus on those in order to stay safe. But when it comes to chronic anxiety, that really works against us. And I love what the metaphor Steinke uses is the leader as a coach.
Yeah.
He shares a story of a freshman in a high stakes last minute basketball game where everything's on the line. And he organizes a play where the ball goes to this freshman knowing he's probably going to go to the free throw line and the entire game is going to hang on him. And a lot of people call that into question. Why would you put all that pressure on this freshman? Why wouldn't you give it to a more seasoned leader? And there's a deep philosophy that the coach had around, well, how else is this player going to learn to function under pressure unless we put him under pressure, right? And so it elevates this principle that the major function of a leader is to help others grow. And I think as leaders, we're often put in situations when anxiety starts to surface, we have internal pressure that we put on ourselves, but there's also all those around us, the system, the organizational inertia pushes us to stabilize things, to calm things down. And I think that Steinke here is elevating the principle that the goal of the leader is not to keep things stable, it's to form resilient people.
When you say to form resilient people, to help people grow, I mean, that is just the opposite of, if I'm focusing on weakness, I'm focusing on how to fix people. Right. I mean, and
yes, rather than to grow people.
And it's a subtle distinction, but it's a really big distinction because I think I am wired to want to try to improve people, which is not the same as helping people grow. One is based on finding their weaknesses and fixing them. And another is based on finding their strengths and helping them to express them or live into them.
Yeah, and I think the result of those two different ways of approaching things is one produces dependency and the other produces strength and independence, someone who's able to stand on their own 2 feet. I have a little story that captures what we're talking about that happened probably about a decade ago, and I keep returning to it in my own leadership. I have 3 boys, and my oldest was learning how to ride a bike for the first time. And I had a memory when I was a kid of my dad running next to me, teaching me how to ride the bike. And so that was my strategy as a parent. I'm going to put him on the bike. I'm going to hold the handlebars in the back of the seat, and I'm going to run alongside of him until he can find his balance, and away we go. Well, the first night it did not go well. He was leaning, putting lots of weight on me. I'm kind of stabilizing him. I'm running up and down the street. I'm a sweaty mess and frustrated after about 45 minutes of this. Night 2, repeat of the same thing. He's not making any progress. And then I think I saw someone who had what they call like a balance bike. It was like a bike for little toddlers without pedals. And I had the idea, well, he doesn't know how to balance. And that's the problem. And so I got home and I took the pedals off of his bike. And I told my son, I said, the challenge is you need to learn to balance. And all you need to do is go out there as much as you want. It's on you. You get to decide when and how you learn to balance. But here it is. You just get on there. I want you to keep both feet on the ground, start running. And then if you feel comfortable, lift your legs. And once you have that, once you can glide up and down the driveway, then we'll put the pedals back on and go out in the street. And within 3 days, he had it. We put the pedals back on and we walked out to the street and away he went.
Yeah.
And that for me captured the type of leader I knew I needed to become, that I needed to give more balance bikes away, that actually empowered people to act on their own initiative rather than me pushing them and then supporting them. And then he got all the credit, which was the best part about it. Right.
I love that story. What comes to my mind, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is when I tried to teach our son how to ride a bike. I lost control of the bike and he fell, and then I ran over him, stepping on him all the way. And after that, he didn't want to let me help him ride the bike, and he taught himself. So, there may be a lesson in there too. But what I love about what you're saying is because when we apply that to leadership, what often happens is somebody can't do the thing that we want them to do. We get over focused on the fact that they can't do that thing. We put them on a performance improvement plan. They still can't do the thing, and then they get fired. As opposed to, what is the equivalent of taking the pedals off the bike?
That's right. And I'll just name, depending on your church and the philosophy of ministry that is in place, the entire philosophy of ministry may work against what we're describing. Actually having a culture of development where we give people meaningful responsibility, where we allow people to struggle, maybe even experience failure in order to fail forward, to build capacity over time and think about long-term formation is very different than a drag and drop culture where we are a church of performance, a staff-dependent system that's performative in nature, where we can't allow weaknesses to show up, where the religious products that we're offering have to be polished and put together. And so the moment someone starts to trip, the moment someone starts to not execute the way we want to, well, the entire product is on the line. And so that's when hey, let's put them on a performance improvement plan, which often is just the next step towards termination. So we can drag and drop someone else who's able to meet the performative expectations that we have. And that entire framework, to me, works against the type of formation we're called to when it comes to following Jesus, because we're all imperfect people on a journey that often allows us to trip and fall. I mean, the disciples were constantly messing up.
Yes. Right. And it
Right.
makes it into the Bible. I mean, we preserved those parts of the story, which seems important.
That's right. And so this first one, I think, is just really important because we as leaders do have a tendency to jump in and want to fix people. And when we pull back and look at how anxiety works, that's essentially, to put a label on it, that's overfunctioning.
Yes.
And when leaders overfunction, we produce. When we overfunction for those we're leading, we produce underfunctioning followers, which is the exact opposite of what we actually want. So It's really important to see those dynamics and how they're at play.
And so in this particular area of focus that Steinke is pointing to, for us to grow our health, it means letting go of the natural tendency to overfunction. But also just throwing somebody on a performance improvement plan might be a form of underfunctioning in our role as leader.
That's right.
And to instead come into our work thinking, how am I going to look for the strengths, find the strengths, give people the opportunity to struggle as they grow their capacity, rather than locking in on the weaknesses.
That's right.
The next,
it's just a different way of seeing the whole thing, right?
And for some of us, it's going to have to be I'm a pretty positive, optimistic person. But when I get anxious, I want to fix things, which means looking at the negative. And I'm also thinking about in my role as a coach, in my former life as a therapist, people mostly come to coaching and therapy with the thing that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to even just be able to shift that conversation. Evaluations often go that way. Meetings with with your boss are often structured. Sure, we'll do the sandwich where we say the positive thing and then the negative thing and then the positive thing, but we're really trying to get to the negative thing.
I call that a chocolate covered turd.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. And, what if we weren't doing that? What if we were actually trying to focus on and pull out the positive?
Yep.
You mentioned this a minute ago, but the next one that we wanted to look at today was what if we were more focused on challenge and not just comfort? And I just want to say I'm taking that very personally because I have noticed, and I'm interested in it if any of our listeners are this way, as I have gotten older, I have I have tilted more toward comfort
Hmm.
than toward challenge.
That's interesting. That's an interesting thing to think about is as we progress through life, where do we feel the gravity pulling us?
That's right.
And these two do go together because growing our capacity is usually as we learn to tolerate discomfort.
Mhm.
Or as our friend Jim Harrington often says, you can't build capacity without increasing your pain tolerance.
Yeah.
That's what this entire one is about. And so the principle here is that health is formed through challenge, not the absence of challenge.
Mhm.
And I just think we know this. We know this deep down. I mean, just before we jumped on to record today, I did a workout. I went down the basement and got my workout done. And what is that? It's putting your body under a certain degree of stress, maybe even tearing fibers in your muscles so that they can regrow and come back stronger, right?
Mhm.
Um, every school year in September, we're all going to get sick. I know that because our kids are back in school. They're slobbering all over each other and they bring it home and boom, we're all sick. But we know that, hey, that's actually going to strengthen our immune system over the course of the year. Like as we're exposed to these germs, the result is a stronger immune system on the other hand. And yet, when it comes to our leadership, we often forget that the best growth happens in the middle of the mess when things are challenging and hard. And so we tend to want to maybe fix things quickly, stabilize things immediately, and then we get sucked into chronic immaturity, which is the exact opposite of what we want.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned the immune response because that is the overarching metaphor that Steinke uses here um, for this kind of growth. And I'm just thinking about, when you got little kids and you just love them so much, you want to protect them from every illness that they could get, right? The idea of
Mm-hmm,
taking them
mm-hmm.
to the church nursery or putting them in school when they get to that age, or letting them go out and get grimy. And it's so counterintuitive because my anxious brain says to me, well, if you just avoid the things that might be threatening, well, that's the game plan, right? That's the way it works. And it is so counterintuitive to say, no, actually, the way that I am able to handle threats, the way that my team is able to do that, the way the organization is able to do that is by actually letting them experience the threats and even putting myself in the place to experience those kinds of threats, especially if I'm old enough that I don't have to do that anymore. Right?
Yes.
When you're
Yes.
younger, you kind of don't have a choice. But as you get older and as you get better at things and people want you to do more of the things that you're better at, You don't actually have to challenge yourself nearly as much if you don't want to.
Yeah, I think overprotection creates emotional immune deficiency.
Yes, exactly.
If people never face challenge, and that includes ourselves, then we don't grow our capacity. And so for this one, I think it raises the question, where am I stuck in comfort-oriented leadership?
Hmm.
Where am I removing friction immediately because I
Hmm.
can't tolerate it? Where am I avoiding discomfort because it's easier than pressing into it? Where am I over functioning for others because my over functioning default is, quite frankly, a well rehearsed pattern versus watching people struggle?
Yeah,
you
right.
know?
And I have a
Um,
mental model that says, oh, I'm a good leader when everyone else is happy and comfortable.
yeah. Where am I giving people answers too quickly rather than watching them struggle to find their own? There's all sorts of
Mhm.
examples that I think could come to mind, but how can I shift to be a challenge oriented leader who instead sits in the tension and knows how to tolerate that rather than relieving it right away, or invites growth and struggle from others and actually celebrates it as a sign of maturity? You're heading in the right direction because you're sitting in the tension, so the metrics
Mhm.
begin to change. um, what if I use questions instead of giving answers to actually increase tension? There's all sorts of,
It's a big
you know what I'm
one.
saying?
Yes, absolutely. And maybe
Um,
even for myself to do those things for myself as well, to not automatically default to the thing that I'm good at, but to always be looking at where am I willing to go down in the basement and do the workout, even if I could do my job from a place of comfort.
yes. Yeah, I think there's a personal aspect to this, and then there's also like the relational web and how I'm relating to others. I think anxious leaders rush, sort of spring into action to relieve discomfort.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and healthy leaders help people grow into it. And there's that personal through line. Where am I trying to relieve my own discomfort
Yeah.
or pushing it away? And then how am I doing that
Mhm.
as I lead and relate to other people?
Yeah, because if I'm prioritizing my own comfort, there's a good possibility that I think good leadership is making everyone else comfortable too. I'm thinking about I, I don't know if people say this anymore, but back in the day there was the adage that, the job of the leader, particularly maybe the spiritual leader, is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's not a bad mental model.
No, I think there's something to that. And you taught me this metaphor, my goodness, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. You just held up a rubber band to me.
Mm,
And I think that gets at some of this, is that a rubber band, in order for it to function, has to have tension on it, right? But too much tension, it snaps.
yeah.
And so there is a calibration here where, are there folks that you're leading that need to experience a little bit of tension because there's not enough stress for motivation and growth? And then I know, as someone, I personally run towards discomfort, not all the time, but I really have a tendency to overdo it. And so there's also, for those of you who might be wired to just push the limit, be aware that the rubber band can snap,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and don't overdo it either.
But one of the things that I've noticed in your leadership is that, and maybe this is because you do have a tendency to run toward discomfort, but you've been really intentional, I'm going to say courageous, about helping your congregation have to grapple with hard things in the culture, hard
Hmm.
things in doctrine and theology, the differences um, that are in any group of people that come together and trying to be a community. And rather than glossing over those, you've been really intentional in your preaching. You bring those things up. And I've
Hmm.
also noticed when there's conflict, you move toward it rather than trying to just smooth it over and let it go underground.
Hmm.
That's something I want you to say more about, um, how and why you do that, but that's something that I've noticed is very much part of your approach to ministry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm maybe have a little bit of a prophetic gifting. That could be part of it. So I'm wired to notice areas where I want to see us grow into greater faithfulness. Um, I think there's probably some frustration for me that I've experienced and perceive in other churches that aren't doing the work of challenging people to actually grow and become more like Jesus. And so it probably is at the heart of it. There's some deep convictions around how to lead, but it's not without cost. It's not without cost. We've had a lot of people. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I preached a sermon called "Divided by Politics," and we're in First Corinthians, and we're talking about the divisions there. And I said, what would Paul say if he were here? He'd say, you have the same problem. You're divided, but it's not around different apostles. It's around different political tribes. And so I just tried to do a cultural assessment of here's where we are, here's how we got here, and here's some political theology that I think would actually move us towards greater unity without erasing difference. But it requires emotional maturity and conversational capacity. And quite frankly, many of you suck at it.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are we going to do this? This is going to be a place of tension. How are we going to grow our emotional maturity and our conversational capacity with one another?
And then you model that,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm sure after you preach a sermon like that, then you get opportunities, we'll call them that, to practice your own emotional maturity and conversational
That's right.
capacity
That's
with
right.
people.
When you preach like that, it's almost creating some immediate accountability because you can't invite people to maturity or greater conversational capacity, then have someone come up and disagree with you and freak out and then, demonstrate immaturity. You have to kind of go, no, this is great. We're doing it right now.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be perfect. Where we kind of fall short, then we can acknowledge that and keep moving, keep growing.
Another place I see that, and this applies to you, but it also applies to other people. I really admire leaders who create a container for the work that they're doing. And so they have agreements, let's say, with the governing board of their congregation or the leadership team of their staff. And they have agreements about how we're going to do things.
Yep.
And then somebody in the group doesn't live up to those agreements. They act in ways that they have agreed not to. And then the leader has the opportunity to either kind of judge that person, roll their eyes, gossip about them with other people, diagnose them, talk to other people, try to find a way to move them out of their leadership position and so forth. Or the ability to go directly to someone and say, this is an agreement that we all made, and this is what you've done. And I want to help get us all back on track here.
Yeah. This isn't a
that
shame or
is
guilt
moving
thing.
toward challenge, not comfort.
Yep. I'll just name this as one other lesson that I've learned is the average person coming to church is not looking to be disrupted or to be challenged. They're looking for comfort and stability. There's so much happening in the world that is destabilizing that most people aren't looking for a faith community that's going to contribute to that. And so I'm noticing in our own area that as we look at different groups of people changing churches to go towards other churches, there's a strong pattern of people congregating in churches that happen to be in a season of stability.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think that when it comes to focusing on challenge rather than comfort, you need to be aware, again, there's a cost to this. Not everybody would raise their hand and say, oh, that's what I really want from my pastor, is to maybe create discomfort or challenge.
Yes. And this conversation is about how we grow our immune system, so to speak, how we grow toward health. And there's just not any other way, is there?
There isn't. If you want a resilient congregation, you're going to have to press into challenge. I don't see another way.
And maybe I'm thinking not only press into challenge. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, about the historically Black church, which was a place people needed to go for comfort, in a world that was so hostile. and yet also balanced that with kind of a prophetic way of seeing the world and a prophetic voice. And somehow, in
Yes.
many times in our history, managed to do both those things really well. And
Yeah.
so I think I might kind of aspire to that. But for most of us, the hard work is going to be moving toward the challenge, not moving toward the comfort. So, yeah.
I love that. I think there is a calibration of comfort and compassion with challenge, and normalizing struggle. But life is hard. Every week we have people coming into our church and they're not needing to be confronted with something. They're needing to be supported and for someone to come alongside and bear their burdens.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where I will fully acknowledge I don't know how to calibrate that perfectly. And this is why I think part of why we have the gift of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit knows the needs in our church. And as we attune ourselves to the work the Holy Spirit's doing, we'll probably get closer to what that calibration needs to be week to week.
I love that word attune. That's probably a good place to end here. What Steinke is suggesting and what we are suggesting is not, a total reordering of everything, but kind of when you have two things put next to each other, which way do you move? If you can focus on others or focus on yourself, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
can focus on integrity or focus on unity, you know,
Mm-hmm.
turn toward integrity. If you've got strengths or weaknesses, well, what if you just move toward the focus on strengths, and then also when comfort and challenge are both there, just a tilting toward practicing challenge. I don't know any way anybody can do all that um, by themselves. And so we need people in our lives, and that can be people we work with, it can be our friends, but it can also and sometimes needs to be a coach, somebody
Yep.
that's on the outside of all the systems that we're in that can help us figure out how to keep the focus um, that we're working on. And the job of the coach is to create a learning environment that is safe and also challenging. And so we that's what we try to do at the Leader's Journey. And I want to invite people to come into our socials or onto our website, theleadersjourney.us, and just say what you think about this episode. What has this stirred up for you? And also um, to let us know if we can help you in a coaching or a consulting role. And I'll just leave it there for now and say thanks for listening, and we hope you take care.